Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Discuss Detroit. I'm your host, Jeanette Pierce with Detroit Experience Factory and City Institute. And today I'm really excited to talk with Adriel Thornton of Mogo and FreshCorp. Hi, Adriel. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We were just talking before we went on here about how long we've known each other and how time flies, right? And we were thinking 04, some campus marshes, like beginning. I mean, I still on tours and have to explain to people who haven't been around as long or don't really remember that campus marshes has not always been there, not in the park that we know it today, of course, right?
Right.
And so that launch of that in 04 was huge, and we've been working together in one way, shape, or form ever since. And then we probably were at the bar a few times together before that, I'm sure.
Sure we were.
So it's been awesome to know you and all the different things. I mean, you are probably involved in more different projects and amazingly impactful projects than almost anybody I know. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and, as I like to say, give us your 2-minute life story.
Right. Wow. In 2 minutes, this is such a challenge,
You know,
but I know.
ish, 2 minutes ish.
Right. So I'm a native Detroiter, Northwest side.
East side, but we can live with that,
Get along, right? And I did have an experience of growing up part-time between Detroit and Virginia, I think, which gave me a different perspective of Detroit. So Detroit was always a home, but also a really big city compared to where we lived in Virginia. So I think that when, every summer I would come back up here and spend the summer. So I really did get to see the best things about Detroit, including I'm sure you probably remember this, being able to go to every weekend they had a festival at Hart Plaza, an ethnic festival at Hart Plaza. There was, Greektown, there was Trappers Alley, there were all these things that you could do during the summer in Detroit, which I think probably kicked off my desire to sort of participate and be in that. But I got introduced into, so I was always sort of attracted to like the cultural lifestyle of the city. So I got really sort of introduced to electronic music because it was happening. But
a new thing. It was literally brand new pretty much at that time.
Right. And so I had older cousins. I'm the youngest of my whole generation. So I had older cousins that were really this was their, like, the start of that whole scene that was them. So because it was primarily African American kids on the northwest side of Detroit who were throwing these parties and the Charivari parties, the GQ crew, like all these other people. So my cousins and stuff would go to the Music Institute, and I again, I literally thought it was a school. I had no idea, because they would be talking about the institute, the Music Institute, the Music Institute.
How do I get in? Where do I send my transcripts?
Right. So they, they would play these mixtapes and stuff of like, the DJs from then. And to me, it sounded like the future. It's like, just like Juan Atkins, Cosmic Cars, all those things sounded like the future I was sure we were going to have, with flying cars and all that kind of stuff. But techno is the soundtrack to the future. So I just remember one summer, my best friend Damon, at the time, he had relatives who were in a techno group. So he was really much more familiar with like the goings on, and the parties were very underground at the time. So he took me to the Alley, which is Carlos Oxum's place. And that's kind of how I got introduced to it. And then started promoting by handing out flyers for the Alley.
Wow. So that would have been, gosh, how old were you? You had to have been a baby.
Yeah, I was 3.
Hey, entrepreneurship starts young in Detroit, man, right? The hustle is real.
Right.
So your lemonade stand, you were like, listen, I can get in and out of places. I'm easily.
Right. So, and once graduating from high school and stuff and moving back up here, it was, you just sort of get into things and sort of,
connection here. I mean, that's one of the things that is a theme, right? Like when I'm talking to people, especially over the age of 22, you know, nothing against 22-year-olds. We were 22 once doing a lot of this stuff, right? That's
Right.
but you know, how did you know about stuff? It is about who you knew. It was literal word of mouth. You weren't Googling something, you weren't on social media about it. If there was somebody that really knew, you know, had knowledge, they weren't just blogging about it, you know, and being able to share it all over the place, right? So it was both hard, you know, hard work to some extent to know, but also easy because it was just people connecting all the time, right? It was like a domino effect of, oh, you know this, or you should come to that, and open arms almost.
And it was really, I was just talking to someone about this, how special that era was. And I think it's because it was, so you had like burgeoning techno scene plus hip hop plus indie rock, garage. You had all these sort of special things, and we were all kids running around together. So you know, you things influenced each other and everything, but each one was unique in its own family in a sense. But what was cool was that you did have to be plugged in somehow to sort of find out about it. And so when people did show up, there was this sense of, oh, you've already passed the cool litmus test by simply being there. And I think that people, you know, it is super different today. I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier to promote today than it was. Than it was. I mean,
yes and no, right? I mean,
yes and no. I mean, but the option of, you know, clicking a couple of buttons and having it go out, like, I mean, you know, I think people have jokingly, someone actually just said this in this group I made on Facebook the other day, because I was doing a promo for another video I was doing. And the person's comment on it was, oh my God, I feel like I've been flyered right here in my living room by you, because I was known for that. Like every time a lot of people saw me, I was handing them something, right? Like a flyer for a party or an event. And that's just how we had to do it, you know? So it was, but you know, it really there was, in a sense, a lot more control in that way, because it was like, where would you go to promote a rave, right? Like, well, you would go to the record stores, or to, you know, that the one coffee shop we had in town, Zoots, you know, or you know,
the right person to tell, you know,
and so there was
this part too, like you had to find a person that you knew would spread the word, but to the people that, you know, made sense to be there.
And so it really, I think it kept, again, sort of the purity and the specialness of things, which is a different animal than some of the other stuff that we do, right? So doing bigger events like Easter Market After Dark or Dally in the Alley now.
So tell me, so that's part of the FreshCorp, right?
So let's
talk a little bit more about that. I mean, and basically you took this, but hey kid, can you flyer, you know, or like, hey, I'll hand out some of your flyers, and turned it, you know, not only into like a side gig really, but into, you know, an amazing event, you know, company. And so tell us a little bit more about that.
So we, you know, once you get the sort of the bug for it, I again always wanted to really, I knew I wanted to promote the music and the sound, because once you find something, even though you appreciate all the specialness about it, you want everybody in the world to know about it, right? So I was really hooked. Then in the first party I did was actually, I worked at Made in Detroit at the time. It was like seriously just me and Robert Stanzler. And he was doing a rave at the State Theater with Dennis White from this group Charm Farm that you may remember.
From the past, blast from the past.
Right. And so they were doing a party called Panic in Detroit, which was going to be a rave. And Robert, you know, knew I wanted to do parties and stuff. So he said, hey, why don't you produce this after party? And so he hooked me up with 1515 Broadway. And I got some DJs I knew to play, which is insane. I was looking at the lineup for that the other day, and it was like these guys are like massive international stars at this point, right?
For example.
Well, I mean, I think it was Rob Hood, which is I think it was Rob Noyes at the time, but Rob Hood, Kevin Saunderson, D Win, and I'm pretty sure Dan Bale played that. All of which are like in the electronic scene, like pretty massive names
Yeah,
now.
of course.
Um,
And this would have been what? Give me a ballpark year-ish, or like this.
like I want to say 92, 3, something like that.
Okay, that's way early. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe even was that might have been earlier.
I don't
That
want to out you on how old you
who
are.
remembers the exact date, right? So, but the thing is that back then, sort of every party group had its own name, and it's sort of its own identity and stuff. So it just made sense to sort of form things, in that way. And then, when I think about the pace of production, right? So most of those events early on for us were really monthly events, so I was doing something every month at 1515 Broadway for years, right? So, and then we started finding alternate spaces and stuff. So it's amazing to me to think of like the pace of what I was doing stuff
Well, and
at.
again, without the social, you were
Yeah,
literally on the street. I mean, without the social media, I mean, so you weren't
yeah,
just sitting there clicking. You were feet on the street,
yeah.
about being
I was
places.
pounding the pavement.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, really FreshCorp has been the name. I went through several other names and iterations
I
as one
understand.
does, right?
You're on a third and hopefully final with that.
Right. But FreshCorp was actually a sort of designed to be a smaller piece of the organization I had at the time, and it's FreshCorp, so CORP, right? Almost like a Marine Corps, but it's a FreshCorp because it was designed to really sort of promote and highlight up and coming DJs. So they were the FreshCorp, right? So, but then I just kept the name and made it the organization itself. So, yeah. So as one does, one evolves. And I worked with Carol Marvin on things like the Jazz Festival, when it was the Montreux Detroit Jazz Festival, and other events like World Party, which was a big party at it was a rave at Joe Louis Arena, basically. That was during the time of the World Cup here. And so, getting a taste for these sort of bigger things, and then, working on things like, I think, no, it was, there was, yeah, I mean, I spent years at Taste Fest with just doing beverage operations, like really literally managing a beverage booth there, part of the crew. It's how these things always work, right? So, and the same thing with Arts Beats and Eats when it was a Pontiac. So you start working on all these events, and it really so I formalized what that approach was, or what it means to me to have me involved in that way. So those are the like FreshCorp does that stuff, right?
And then bigger events, even today. Well, before we jump to today, I guess a little bit more. What talk to us about the beginning of the Detroit Electronic Music Festival and what that lead up to creating that. And
yeah, so it's so I mean, from my trajectory with it was, again, having years as a rave promoter, we all had ideas or visions of wouldn't it be great if we could do something like this at Hart Plaza. And we even it's funny you mentioned Campus Martius, because there was a party we did, or that I at least helped support, at the Kennedy. Remember the park that was
Kennedy Square.
Yeah, Kennedy Square, that was there. So little little things had popped up here and there, and I also I was on 89X as a radio host for a show that we broadcast from Motor Lounge, and so that was 97 through through 2000. There were all these things that were in place for me, as far as, so it made perfect sense. And again, I had worked with Carol Marvin on things like the Jazz Fest. So, it was really, I mean, again, everyone had sort of this idea of doing it, but Carol's the one who had the actual like resources and the connections with potential sponsors and things like that, and who's actually the one who produced it. So it made perfect sense for me to be involved with that, right, and to help with that. And so it was really, and I think that people don't necessarily really sort of understand like the significance of that in the electronic music world, because nothing really on that scale had. I mean, there were obviously European festivals and things like that, but in the US there wasn't really anything like that had happened in techno.
Right. And that was 2000 then, right?
Yeah, it was 2000 was the first year.
Yeah. Well, and there's an exhibit at the Detroit Historical Museum, right? 20 years
There's
of
20 years of the festival on there. So let me just explain. I was involved in the 3 years that it was the DEMF. So that would be 2000 and 2002.
Yeah.
And so the view is that the exhibit is 20 years of a techno festival in Detroit,
Right.
but it is not 20 years of the DEMF.
Right.
We do not call it DEMF past 2002.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just being real. And
right. Well, and I know there's been talk about doing another, a different, a DMF again, and what that could look like. But I remember, so I was pretty clueless, to a lot of things. I've been really, I mean, musically, I'm not musically inclined, right? Like I have a lot of skill sets and pat myself on the back. So I'm not saying, but music is not one of those. Like I appreciate it. And I think that's why I actually am so appreciative, because I go, how did they do that? That's amazing, but the summer of 2000, I was interning at United Way in Capitol Park.
Oh, okay, crazy.
So I was still in college, but had my first big city, like grown up job, as I felt, and, I grew up on the East Side. So I'd commute down Jefferson, skip the traffic on 94 and,
right.
park in Grand Circus Park, underground parking was where they parked, and then walk, down Griswold, through Capitol Park then. Right. And I remember going to an after party. So, Megan, our mutual friend, Megan Glenn, and who I grew up with, I think is how I got connected to an after party for what would have been that. It had to have been that.
Yeah.
Because it was 2000. And it was at the David Stott on like the 32nd floor. There was like an office, like an abandoned office, and DJs in different like offices, and you could go out and and I remember just going out on the little balcony, and it was 4 a.m. or something probably, and it was so foggy you couldn't see if you didn't know if you were on the first floor or the 32nd floor. Right. And this was all before I did or knew really much of what I was going on. I mean, I was hanging out at the music menu, I was getting a little bit of a blues education, but that was kind of that was the first time I really heard or experienced techno in any way, and it's amazing that happened to be that first year.
Yeah, and I think that's an important sort of thing that touch on, right? Is that the beauty of it, especially that first year, was that it was an opportunity for folks to do it was free, so the entire city could come down and participate, which I think is really important for equity and access and things like that. The fact that like there were no real restrictions to become really was sort of the thing that people in the city had known of techno and had. I mean, you could hear Cosmic Heart or Clear or any of those things at anybody's backyard barbecue, right? So it wasn't like it was new, but they maybe didn't necessarily know that that's what we call techno, right? And they certainly, lots of folks the city at large had never really saw the party part of it. And so they were able to come and experience it, and I think that it just made a lot more sense.
Yeah, it must have been hard was it difficult obviously it's one of, and still even today, right? Those in the know, those that get it, those that appreciate it, you
Mhm.
know, are one segment. And then there's this whole other world that
Mhm.
is just so clueless to, you know, that it's a big thing, that it
Yeah.
started in Detroit, that, you know, people pack arenas or, you know, big places like Hart Plaza.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine that 20 years ago, you're trying to get a sponsor or, you know,
Right.
even tell people what this event is about, right? But I think, but that was then helps promote the music itself. That's the whole point, right?
Yeah, and there's, the thing is that even prior to the festival, there's always been this sort of um, um, learning curve, right? That's sort of inherent with it, right? So, you know, how many years have I spent trying to explain to people what
Have
what
you
techno
have
is?
you gotten to a succinct, like what I would love to hear your what's techno
Right.
spiel after all these years.
Right. It's funny to me that because now you can just show them or listen. Like if I'm like trying to explain what it is, I'm like, listen to this, or here's a video of this, right? So, and I mean, people I think generally have heard of techno at this point, but I don't think like with anything, they don't necessarily know the scene part of it or like the party, the celebration part of it, right? So it's um, in this moment probably the most popular global music genre,
Yeah.
and so it's huge. Like it has surpassed rock. Um,
And Detroiters, I mean, obviously they know, like, but this is where when you travel or when you talk to people from other places, we take stuff for granted so much here. I think
yeah,
that's part of it. It's like you know, Derek May would have a set that you could go to for pay $5, you know, to go see him somewhere, you know, or and we kind of were like, oh, isn't that just how it is? And then you have someone that comes from somewhere else and they're like, what?
right,
You know,
right.
like,
People don't. The thing is that again, globally, Detroit techno. Detroit is a genre of music. And when you go to like any record store anywhere else in the world, like in Japan, in Europe, and there's if you go to the record store, there's a Detroit techno section, right? So it's a thing, and people when they come here, this is the other thing too is that, and these are on the very serious note when we talk about nighttime economy, and how important that thing is to any region, the cultural why you want to get up and live that day, type of stuff. Um, People don't necessarily realize the importance at one point submerge, which is sort of the label for the distributor for underground resistance.
yeah.
At one point was per unit exporting more than GM, right? So, the sort of impact that this music has had on the world and what it's done for Detroit, and the fact that people even throughout the 90s and stuff pre-festival were coming to Detroit because this was the mecca of this music that they loved.
Yeah.
So it's funny to me that again like your wands and people like that are um, can walk down the street and people would have no idea who they are. But they go like literally, you fly with them to Tokyo and people are like, oh my God, it's Juan. So it's a really, but there's a whole list of reasons why that is, right? And like how, um, just how America is.
Well, and I think, do you think that Detroit, you know, because we have such amazing musical talent through so many genres, and I feel like Detroit's a little less starstruck, and because
Yeah,
everybody knows somebody who was, the stories, everybody's parents were like, oh, Diana Ross was, my neighbor, and
right, right,
there's
right.
that
Yeah.
whole Motown was literally like in everywhere in the city, it seemed like. So all the way then, I mean, not even counting going back to Hastings Street and all of that, but and then the rock, the techno, like it seemed accessible, right? That these people blew up, they were our neighbors, or the people that are, that we kind of know, even if it's tangentially. Do you think that has something to do with it? Like,
Probably. I mean, I think that it's, I think that, well, so, number one, there is this sort of cool factor issue, which I call it an issue because it's like completely ridiculous, but there's this, too cool for school aspect with I think Detroit media in a sense, in that like they oftentimes are super late on stuff, but they don't want to talk about or promote people until they get big somewhere else, and then they're all over them. But
Well, because
uh,
they don't, do they not really know? Is that, or they're
no, I
just,
think they know. It's just, I mean, it's. I
yeah,
don't know if I'm not saying it's the writers per se. I think it has
yeah.
historically been more of an editor type
It's
of decision.
kind of like that you're an expert from 100 miles away kind of thing. Like
Yeah, um,
I feel that in a lot of, I mean,
yeah,
why did I start doing some of these bigger projects? Oregon, I was the keynote of the Oregon State Conference and worked with Chicago and Vegas on how to tell stories of the place. And then I was like, wait, maybe I should, maybe somebody local would want, want to, so I'm
yeah.
working with Pontiac now, but
Well, and also, I think that there. I mean, it's in exploring the why. I think there's also a sense of people, it's underground. So people don't necessarily want that story to be out there
yeah,
on some aspect, right? So, the all the kids at Gold Cash, I mean, at Gold Cash Gold, at Gold Dollar,
right.
didn't, they weren't necessarily clamoring for, a news article about, come to my show at this, underground rock place, you know,
They might have said they wouldn't have wanted it, but they probably would
yeah,
have.
of course, everybody wants it. Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but it's also like, I mean, I think part of the specialness is that, it wasn't over the top and they weren't treated like celebrities, but
Right.
I think that the temperature could be turned up just a little bit, right? So, I think it's fun and good that we have a techno festival here. I think that the market could accommodate many more. I think that from a city perspective, that it's nice that we have Techno Month or whatever, or Techno Week. Um, but I think that it would be really hot if the city actually sort of acknowledged it in the same way that they do Motown.
Right. Which we haven't totally capitalized on, like
Yeah.
that's one of the few things. I mean, and obviously Motown is doing amazing stuff and with their expansion
Mhm.
big plans to do, I think, more than maybe they had, which they didn't have a lot of resources. It's crazy hard to think about, but like the little Motown Museum was,
Yeah.
thank God for Barry Gordy's sister, right, who
Right.
made it happen. But uh,
Esther Goody.
yeah, Esther, I'm always amazed. So over the years, right, people would ask all kinds of questions, right, and I'm the answer gal. And there one question I would get that I was always wish I had had an answer for, which is, where can I go to hear Motown?
Right. It's really interesting, right? Isn't it?
And I would be like, well, I'd be like, well, if Thornetta was doing kind of a regular gig, something like if you like Motown, you'd like Thornetta, and she sometimes does a Motown song, or like the Detroit Princess has a Motown band, but in
Interesting. So,
Nashville, they're like country music,
yeah, yeah.
everywhere in your face, which I don't necessarily know, like if that's the way to do it either. But
Right. But
and
that's the level of, or like how Chicago treats house music
yeah,
and
blues even.
blues. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? So it's really, I think it's missed opportunities but again, that's what I was talking about earlier with now we're having conversations about what we would consider to be the nighttime economy, which is where those things would most likely
Adrian
live.
Tanan, or you're talking with, we have there's somebody in the city official,
Yeah.
government that is trying to be helpful. I think that's that's where the disconnect was. You had all this
Well,
community
yeah, I mean,
level
there's
stuff.
layer upon layer upon layer, right?
Right.
But it's I mean, but we see some incremental steps being made now. Where sort of, there's an arts and culture organization, Rochelle's thing now, and
Yeah.
but I was gonna say that I think part of the problem is that been from sort of a civic leadership standpoint, that again, because these things were so underground,
Mm.
that the folks who are, when it comes to resources and sort of acknowledgement or things like that, people look when they talk about arts and culture or whatever in the city, typically think of things like the DIA and that's it, right? So, but so when it comes to stuff like this, they just don't know.
Right.
I don't think that they know, and I also don't think that they connect the dots to it. But there are different groups like we've got the Detroit Berlin Connection, which I'm on the board of,
Nice.
organizations like that, which are actively trying to connect those dots so that it makes sense. I.e., we talk about we're framing things in a sense of like, look, this is the economic impact
Right.
of that,
The business case, if you will, for
business case, so if you really think about all the raves, all the parties that I did, and trying to calculate how many thousands, potentially millions of dollars
yeah,
were brought into the city.
because they ate food, they drank booze, they had hotel room, or
Yeah,
if they
you
were
know,
here,
there's real economic impact and there's social impact, right? So, you talk about, we both have a mutual friend, Phil Cooley, and Phil will tell you this, he'll tell you this too, that part of his decision to move back here was because of the techno and the indie scene. Like, I mean, people
yeah,
are
it's
moving, staying, whatever, and like the sort of representation, the ambassadorness of that
yeah.
is also something that really needs to be considered too. It's like we have some pretty solid things that we are culturally known for, and why we, again, from a civic sort of standpoint, I think there just could be a lot more done
Yes.
to capitalize on that.
Well, preaching to the choir, obviously here, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
why we do what we do, and why I started doing it was I was also my first client, if you will. I was like, I know Detroit, I grew up here, and then I started realizing there were all these things I didn't know, and wanting to share that because I liked my life more. I chose to be here more. And not that I didn't know the challenges, or not that we don't have challenges. I think this is something we always really I try to make sure people realize. It's like, just because you're promoting something or saying that this is something good, it doesn't mean that you're ignoring the bad. Good and bad are not mutually exclusive. They
Right.
exist simultaneously, and they do in every city, right? So
Right.
so for a long time, people would say, oh, you say anything positive, people are like, what about the schools, or or the like, and they simultaneously exist, and it does matter. You have to know about the good things in order to keep working on the challenges that we have. I mean,
Again,
we
that's
did an economic impact study because we want, same thing, we take people to bars, to restaurants, into shops, like April Anderson, God bless her, she's a great numbers person, right? So like, she would actually say, when Detroit, Jeanette brings a tour here, our revenue for the day goes up 16%, and that equals X amount each time, right? So that and it sucks that we have to, I mean, I get people wanting numbers, but it's such a no-brainer, what the work that you've done, and the positive impact it has, that it should be supported so much more.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of like, how do you, attacking the problem of that, right? There's so many layers to it.
Yeah.
But again, I do want to put a caveat in it. I think that it is changing. I think a really important piece of the puzzle is that, folks who these things were important to, are now we're in positions where we are assuming some power, and we're getting involved in different things. So now we get it, right? So a big part of it is a big part of, I think, really being able to promote something or support something or highlight something is really knowing and understanding it in the first place.
Right.
And so I think that we definitely have folks who are moving into those sort of roles now. So and it's been, now known and big for such a long time.
The historical museums do, that just the
Yeah.
fact that the historical museum, I mean, they've been trying to do some really good and better, more robust programming, and they won the gold medal for the 67 exhibit. It's an amazing, if people haven't been, definitely check it out. It's history, but this is history now, isn't that also?
Right. I know it's,
Again,
I think
feeling old.
right. I never feel old, but I do feel like, where in the hell did time go? And I think what's funny, to me, so speaking specifically about like the actual like experiential part of techno, right, which is the party, in whatever form that takes. I was not thinking of prosperity, right? No one was thinking of, I was thinking of the next event I had to do, right? So, but never for like, I mean, who would have, I would never have thought that, here we sit 20 years later talking about this thing in a historical context, and that
Right.
it's an important thing to talk about. So
And like I was going, oh, what if you found that flyer? Do you have any like the old flyers from
I do. I found some,
right?
and again, we were talking about the digital aspect of things,
Yeah.
but one of the things that's been really interesting is that people are posting old school flyers and things like that now. So it's some of them. I've seen some of my own events there that I had completely forgotten about
Yeah.
because it's not like I sit around looking at my box of flyers for like. But I have quite a few of the old ones, at least a copy of it, whether it's physically or digitally. And it's a riot. It's funny to look at. It's like, God, like if you could.
Well, and are you printing flyers for today's stuff? I mean, are there still printed? I mean, because also, what are we not, if we don't have, yeah, you'll have digital stuff, but you're not going to come across a flyer in 20 years from now unless
Right.
a flyer exists, right? Unless you make
Right.
a flyer, which it probably is less often than, or is there still a role for that in
I think that, so there definitely is still a role. I don't produce flyers as much, but I'll tell you what is still produced and used often enough are posters.
right,
So which is the flyer, the posterized version of the flyer. But there's a lot of. Um, I think that there's still a role for it. Um, because it's people may not be connected to you digitally.
right.
You know.
Well,
Um,
and I was talking with Eddie Baranek about this. We were talking about some of the rock stories, if you will, but they're, the same reason records and even mixtape. When you said mixtape at the beginning, again, for folks that are under a certain age, what, like the fact, but tapes are making a comeback even, which
right.
I think is just kind of funny. But part of it is that physical, having something physical,
Yeah.
is important.
I have always been much more inspired by tangible things. So a lot of the artwork on record covers, cover sleeve artwork, um, flyers. Like there was a whole sort of sub industry around parties that involved creating flyers and artwork. And I miss having those sort of, as promoters, we spent a lot of time um, really creating identities for each of the parties.
Right.
So it was like,
Design. I mean, this goes to the Detroit, city of design, right? What is
yeah,
design? It's music, it's the art to promote the music, it's the physical space that you create for the
right,
event, right? It's all
right.
of those things.
It's all of that. And so I definitely miss that, as an event producer. So, sometimes the process for creating an event I have created quite a few parties based on a certain design aesthetic I wanted to see, right? So I did a series of nights at Zoot's Coffee House called EXAT, which was an ambient music night, and we did it every Monday for 3.5 years. And it was partly inspired by, I mean, not just the music, but by artwork that was associated with that music.
Yeah.
You know,
Because they go together. I mean, especially with, I
yeah,
think, electronic, is there, it really lends itself to both having a visual component,
mhm,
or looking at something and listening. I think maybe more than almost any other type of music, maybe
yeah.
jazz.
Right. I mean, it's important especially with a genre of music that typically is faceless,
Right.
or it's
Part
not
you're,
the same marketing
you're not
strategy as they do with pop, right?
right.
So a lot of times, like it's to sort of explain what things are, it is the visual representation. It's that graphic work, or paintings like Abdul Haq does. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of um, folks who have definitely contributed from their artistic talents to the visual representation of what this is.
Well, I know we could go on forever, and and we'll definitely want to like offline grab a drink once we can safely do so, or maybe I'm into the Zoom happy hours to some extent, right, where you can have conversations and have a drink and be safe
Right.
in the winter at least. But I do have a couple of questions. So one, you had mentioned earlier when you're trying to explain things to people, you say listen to this song or watch this video. Is there anything that you want to share with people? And that kind of goes into the second part is there somebody from Detroit's musical history, whether techno or whatever genre, or an album, or just some favorites that you might have, that you would want to give a shout out to?
Wow. So, I mean, the first thing is, I mean, follow FreshCorp on
Yeah, absolutely.
on there's a Facebook group and Twitter account for it. You can also follow me on social, Instagram and Twitter. So that's at Adriel Detroit.
Nice.
Yeah, which is
We'll tag you in when we share that with everybody.
right. And then on the that's a really hard question to answer, right? Because there's
It's not an exhaustive list.
I think that a great place to start for folks, right, is to, I would say, get Cybertron's Clear album, or Enter, depending on what iteration when they printed it. But that is basically Juan Atkins' group, and that album is really the song Alleys of Your Mind is widely considered to be the first techno song. So that's a great place for people to start. It's not, I mean, there are tracks on there that still make me just get up and just have to start dancing. So I would say if you want an intro to Detroit, start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then any other calls to action? So like Facebook, Twitter, FreshCorp. We didn't get a chance to talk about Mogo too much, but Mogo's awesome. People should get a Mogo subscription.
Yeah, buy a Mogo pass. It's really worth it. It seems weird to be thinking about it right now in January, but it's a great way for us to get exercise and to be able to get out and be active, right? Considering that we can't do much. Right?
It's been kind of mild, It's
right. Yeah, it's actually
not snowing. It's not as bad, and
yeah, it's been actually still. I would still call this weather bikeable.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, and as a Detroit-based nonprofit organization, it's really good to support us.
And you've really, this summer had the expansion. So what is it, up to over 700 bikes? I want to say.
Yeah, we expanded into Northwest Detroit, Ferndale, Royal Oak Park, Huntington Woods, and Berkeley. So we have, in essence, become the sort of first real regional transportation system, which is insane, right?
It's like sad, but again, you're moving in the right direction.
Right.
And it really is.
So yeah, it really it's an important. I think it's an important addition to the city, which is one of the reasons why I really love working for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so go buy a Mogo pass. I think that when it's safe to do so, start going out to some of these events. I feel bad pushing that right now, but
no, that's what I mean. This is, we want to support you, and you support Detroit. It's all, it's all full circle. So
yeah, but
and the best way to find.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, just participating in experiential things like events, it matters, right? It's a great way to sort of see the city in a different light, and to be able to expose yourself to something that you may not have been exposed to. Is exposed a bad word right now? Should I be saying exposed?
You're talking about experiences, to new things. It can be mostly good there. And the best way to find out about events that you're doing is by following FreshCorp on Twitter.
FreshCorp or Adriel Detroit. I talk about them on both platforms. So
awesome.
Or both channels, I should say. So yeah.
Great. And we'll certainly, our Detroit Experience Factory social we use to promote other things that are going on, right? So we'll always be sharing your stuff and everything. So Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, and for everything that you have done for Detroit over the years, and will hopefully continue to do. Looking forward to seeing what comes next, and what next project, what next event, how the future is going to unfold. I think we're all looking forward to good things in the future, especially with some not so great things happening right now. But
Yeah.
I appreciate you, and Detroit appreciates you. So
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you. Thank you for speaking with me. I really do appreciate this.
I love it. And thank you everyone for joining us. As always, you can find all of our former conversations, former guests, and previous conversations at thecityinstitute.com, and learn about all of our virtual tours, including our new Detroit Music Tour series on DetroitExperienceFactory.org, and follow us on all the Facebooks and Twitters and interwebs out there. So have a great night, everybody. We'll talk soon.